Brics planning to introduce new trading currency backed by gold at August summit. Gold standard will be a great benefit to strengthening single currency. And then 41 countries have applied for Brics membership. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic. And we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey everyone, welcome to Weird Wednesday. So a few months ago, we began talking about the collapse of the US dollar due to Russia and the Brics nations, which once again, that's Brazil, India, Russia, China, and South Africa, that are joining forces to develop a new currency backed by gold that will be used in trading oil instead of the dollar, since Biden has managed to piss off the entire world. Well, I read an article the other day in Morningstar stating that on June 15th, BlackRock, Vanguard, and many others all submitted filings for SEC approval to offer spot Bitcoin exchange traded funds. And to this point, the SEC hasn't permitted spot Bitcoin ETFs, which would invest directly in the digital asset. And the spot Bitcoin ETF would allow investors to buy and sell Bitcoin without having to set up an account with like the whole cryptocurrency exchange. And that's really important because you've heard our episodes with like the whole disaster with FTX. So this would be a good alternative for people not trusting those exchanges, and would likely attract more investors for, BlackRock and the Vanguards of the world. But my question is, why now? Like, why all of a sudden at the same time are all of these big titans seeking SEC approval when the SEC has repeatedly rejected registering spot Bitcoin ETFs in the past? And this article mentioned that none of this is like new information. They say, quote, the SEC's misgivings and concerns with cryptocurrency exchanges have been well documented. That's led some to wonder aloud why BlackRock has decided to enter the fray at this stage, speculating whether it may have an inside scoop that gives it confidence its proposal will succeed where others have failed. It could be that BlackRock's name alone is enough to set regulators' mind at ease. On the other hand, if BlackRock's petition is approved, it would open the floodgates to similar proposals from other asset managers mimicking BlackRock, end quote. So I think that the timing of this might have something to do with the Brics nations discussing their de-dollarization movement by creating a currency that's backed by gold. And like I said, this would be used to trade oil, which would completely collapse the US dollar because the US dollar is not backed by gold anymore. Nixon took it off the gold standard, and the only reason it has done so well is because it's been used to trade oil in the entire world. And we go into great detail on all of this in episode 97. So you can go back and listen to that if you want to learn more about the background of the Brics currency. But anyhow, last week, the Russian embassy in Kenya made a number of statements that sound like this can be happening as soon as August. So some of those statements included, quote, Brics planning to introduce new trading currency backed by gold at August summit. Gold standard will be a great benefit to strengthening single currency. And then 41 countries have applied for Brics membership. 41. That is alarming. And with that being said, an article in FX Street quoted Leslie Masdorp, who is the vice president of the Brics New Development Bank. And she said, quote, it's going to take a very long time for currency movements to take shape. So any discussion of alternate currencies is indeed a much more median than long-term aspiration, end quote. But on top of all of that, we already have talked about how multiple banks have folded in the US. The Biden administration has already introduced the FedNow digital currency program. And the fact that BlackRock and all of these big players all submitted for cryptocurrency at the same time, right when this news comes out from Brics, makes me think that they know something that they're not telling the rest of us, and shit's about to go down. So, Tara, is it just me, or is this an indicator that our money is probably not too safe right now?
Oh, Stephanie, I think our dollar is definitely in trouble. And what I find concerning is like this push towards digital currency. And you mentioned this earlier, like what happened with the whole FTX scandal earlier this year. I personally have never been able to really wrap my head around the concept of digital money because it can literally just be wiped out with the push of a computer key. And like that freaks me out. But you can look up article after article, especially on digital currency publications that are all talking about the decline of the US dollar and how that's helping companies who have major stocks in international revenue. And I want to read something from an article I found on a publication from WHTC, and it was related to a New York Reuters article, and it was released on July 14th. And it explains what's happening in more simplistic terms. So, for any of our listeners who are like me and don't understand a lot of this, hopefully it will help make sense of things. So, according to the article, quote, cooling US inflation is accelerating a decline in the dollar, and risk assets around the world stand to benefit. The dollar is down nearly 13% against a basket of currencies from last year's 2-decade high and stands at its lowest level in 15 months. Its decline quickened after the US reported softer than expected inflation data last Wednesday, supporting views that the Federal Reserve is nearing the end of its interest rate hiking cycle. Because the dollar is the linchpin of the global financial system, a wide range of assets stand to benefit if it continues falling. Weakness in the dollar can be a boon to some US companies, as weaker currency makes exports more competitive abroad and makes it cheaper for multinationals to convert foreign profits back into dollars. The US tech sector, which includes some of the big growth companies that have led to markets higher this year, generates over 50% of its revenue overseas. And so, in addition to that, I read an article that came out in a publication called Quartz this past Saturday, and it supported this whole thing because it was talking about how tech companies with market capitalizations above $200 billion in the New York Stock Exchange and Index have reached an all-time high as of July 13th. This includes like Meta, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. And so after doing this research, it like makes sense that BlackRock, Vanguard, and all these major companies are pushing for this digital currency. And Stephanie, you've heard of Robert Kiyosaki, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he's apparently been very outspoken with warning everybody that this like giant economic crash is coming to the United States. And he's been talking about this for a while. And I recently read an article in Bitcoin.com that came out this past Saturday. And it was reporting that just last week, Kiyosaki was specifically warning about the end of the US dollar, citing reports that you and I have already discussed about Brics launching this common currency backed by gold. And according to the article, quote, stating the US dollar will die, the renowned author noted that trillions of US dollars will rush home and inflation will go through the roof. He also stated that the price of Bitcoin will reach 120,000 next year. This past Friday, Kiyosaki tweeted, quote, why is the stock market taking off? Because the debt ceiling has been removed. Means national debt to rise with stock market. Rich get richer as Americans get poorer. Sad. Sticking with real money and real assets. Gold, silver, Bitcoin. End quote. So then I read another article in a publication called Decrypt, and it was talking about how the CEO of this company, Circle, did a post on Twitter about how the US dollar is under real threat. And if we don't switch over to digital currency, then we're doomed. So I want to play this like 2-minute clip that he put on Twitter.
What does a cup of coffee have to do with the future of the global economy? While it's hard to imagine today, in the future, digital currencies will fundamentally change the way we pay for things, whether I'm buying a cup of coffee or shipping goods around the world. If you think back to 1998 with dial-up internet, could we imagine that in 10 years we'd have instant access to all of the world's knowledge? Or 10 years after that there'd be billions of broadband connected smartphones with AIs mediating real-time human translation, enabling rich media and communications, coordinating human commerce with extraordinary velocity? And yet today, to send money, whether across the table or across the planet, takes days, and there are often high fees, which will amount to a nearly $1 trillion tax on the global economy, impacting mom and pop shops like this one, as well as the largest businesses in the world. In the next 10 years, digital currencies will transform the global economic system as they become usable by billions of people to safely and seamlessly transfer money to anyone with a phone for fractions of a penny, instantly, anywhere in the world. The strength of the dollar translates to value for American families. The faster that money can move in the world, the more economic growth that can happen. But in today's global economy, the dollar's position of strength is under threat. Competition for what money gets used on the internet is increasing. The real question is whether global commerce will happen in digital dollars or digital euros or yuan. And the United States has a choice to make. Does it want dollars to be the foundation of currency on the internet, or do we want to let other countries lead the way?
Okay. So I guess this was like something he presented like to Congress or whatever. And I still can't wrap my head around Bitcoin and digital currency. But realistically, like all money's fake, right? Even the US dollar only has value because we assign it value. And if that value disappears, it won't matter how much paper money you have in the bank or under your mattress or whatever, because we're all going to be fucked. And so this push for digital currency, if we're the only country, if we're still depending on the dollar and everyone else is using this digital currency, like we truly are fucked. And from everything I'm reading and from things that you've said and from things that I've heard from other people, I think it's all going to happen a lot faster than we think it is.
Oh, I think so too. I think it's happening as we speak. And, like DeSantis, RFK, Trump, they've all been very outspoken about how this is really dangerous because it's not like the digital currency aspect is dangerous. What's dangerous is that our government or the central bank, the Federal Reserve, which is not part of the government, that they are going to have complete control over everyone's money. And you think like, oh, well, nothing bad would really happen. Well, just look at the Freedom Truckers in Canada. They had their accounts frozen. So imagine if the government has everything that you own and they could turn it off with the flip of a switch because you have a podcast like ours or because you aren't supporting your child going through gender affirming surgery. Like they would have complete control. And so that's the thing that's so alarming and has people like Trump, RFK, and DeSantis so worried about this. And Tara, you mentioned last week about how China is like pissed at Biden because he had called Xi Jinping a dictator. And according to this article in FX Street, they said that China is enacting export controls on critical commodities, including rare earth metals, which the United States is almost 100% dependent on China to supply for all of our high tech and green energy applications. And so Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen went to Beijing to try and smooth things over and failed miserable because she's just about as likable as Biden. So now I feel like we're screwed on that end as well, and it's probably going to continue hurting our economy.
Yeah, apparently, Yellen thinks we just need to communicate better with China, and then all of our strained ties will be resolved because national security shouldn't derail economic relations between our countries. And just like everyone else in the fucking Biden administration, she communicates with zero authority and zero strength, and China doesn't respect us at all. Do you know what she focused on in this meeting, Stephanie? She was calling on Beijing to work with the US to do more in addressing climate change. And she met with a group of female entrepreneurs and economists to discuss more representation of women in the workforce and the Chinese economy. Well, that's all well and good, but our government administration is fucking delusional. China doesn't care about climate change and women in the workforce. They want to take over and dominate the world. And it's a fucking, or like our administration is a fucking joke. And I know this is off topic, but speaking of China, I just read an article this morning that scared the shit out of me. And it came from the Epic Times, which is a pretty reputable, like conservative news outlet. And Stephanie, listen to this. So, according to this article, China is developing weapons targeting brain function with the goal of engaging in cognitive warfare to influence government and military leaders and control entire populations. And unknown to many people, the CCP and their People's Liberation Army are developing what they're calling neurostrike weapons, which, according to a report written by intelligence analysts who co founded the CCP Biothreats Initiative, neurostrike is described as basically engineered targeting of the brains of soldiers and civilians using non-kinetic technology with the objective of impairing cognition, reducing situational awareness, inflicting long-term neurological damage, and degrading normal cognitive function. And the article talks about how this technology is designed to be a core component of China's warfare strategy against the US and in blocking us from intervening in conflicts like China invading Taiwan. And the study stated, quote, imagine immunized PLA troops like the Chinese People's Liberation Army being inserted into a geography where a specific weaponized bacterial strain has been released prior to their entry to prepare the ground and eliminate points of resistance. Any remaining source of resistance on the ground are then dealt with through CCP neurostrike weaponry that instill fear, intense fear, and or other forms of cognitive incoherence resulting in inaction. Under this scenario, the Chinese military would be able to establish absolute control over Taiwan while blunting any American strategic options to intervene, end quote. And apparently they don't have like the full defense industrial base to complete this technology right now. But with all the research they're doing, they're saying that any breakthrough in this research would provide unprecedented tools for the CCP to forcibly establish this new world order. So in addition to the collapse of the US dollar and our already strained relationships with China, now we have to worry about brain control measures.
Well, that's terrifying.
Yes.
And I mean, think about it. It's like COVID, which came from the Wuhan lab, could have been them testing how quickly it spreads. And,
Right.
I mean, and then we talked last week about all of these, or maybe that was 2 weeks ago, all of these single military aged men coming from China into the United States. So it makes sense. And that's what I really think. It's like, we keep hearing about nuclear weapons and nuclear war. I don't think that China or Russia are going to do that. Like, I think that there's so many other things available, whether it's attacking our grid and having the entire, electric grid, internet, everything go down, or something like this with a biological weapon. And so it's really frightening what's happening. And it's even more frightening when you see that our administration is worried about things like Pride Month
Mhm.
than getting our military ready and protecting its citizens. So let's just like recap this, okay? Biden puts the United States right in the middle of this Ukraine war with Russia, and in the process pisses off the whole world. Inflation is rampant, and now the dollar is collapsing. And if that were not bad enough, now China's going to totally screw us on the raw materials that we need for all of this green energy electric car bullshit that the Biden administration is pushing. And now we have to worry about brain control weapons.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, what a good weird Wednesday. So we'll keep following all this craziness, but it sounds like we need to start paying attention to what's happening with the dollar, because it not only could, it will affect every single one of us. So
Mhm.
we'll keep everyone posted on the latest with that, and we'll see you back here for Freedom Friday. Thanks for tuning in. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.